Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Blood and Bones with your host, Mandy Tang. And in today's episode, I hope that it can keep you company. This is the week of Halloween, which is one of my absolutely most favorite holidays. And I just came back from a rain walk. So I live in the Pacific Northwest, and the seasons change so dramatically. It'll be hot in the summer, especially because I live inland. Like, I live an hour from the ocean. And so in the summer, it's so hot. And then in the winter, it's not like in the Northeast or Denver, where I used to live, where winter is like, you have to wear your multi-layer North Face every single day. This winter is like really mild. It's not like these like blistering upstate New York, lake winters that you get. These winters are actually kind of pleasant. I mean, sometimes it'll get to like the 30s, but it usually hovers around the 40s and 50s. And pretty much it is literally like if you guys watched Twilight, it is like living in Forks, and it rains almost every day in the winter. And when you have just had sun every single day in the summer, like when I'm telling you that there is such a relief when the rains come, I am in my happy place. I have my tea. I am just enjoying life. So this week, it really started raining for the first time. I mean, it's been on and off, but like we had a pretty good downpour over the weekend. And today was drizzling. Drizzling turning into big rain, drizzling, big rain, kind of that oscillation. And I went out with my son, and he carries this stick, and we go on our little walks. And I realized, like, I kind of want to make this a thing where I do a rain walk, because I think it's so healing. And there was this moment when I was walking and I could smell, like, it was almost like the trees were emitting a scent, obviously because the trees are falling and they're changing colors, which is also beautiful. But they're also emitting a kind of, just like that tree scent, I was walking, I was like, oh my God, it smells so good. What is this? It's amazing. So I'm back. I'm ready to talk to you guys. I wanted to give you all an update on the book. So as you may know, I am writing a book called Career Wounds, and it is a, self-help novel. It's a full book, and I'm at the point now where I'm in the final stages of editing it. It's a very funny thing when you've never done something before and then trying to identify for yourself where you are in that process. It sort of feels as if I can say I think I'm in the final stages. And at the same time, I'm like, also, I have no idea. I mean, I think, or I'm in layer 1 of 6 layers of absolute terror and hell, like unknown. It feels like I'm close. I'm not sure. I think I'm close. Well, I have to be close because the thing is due November 15th. But anyway, as far as my first time published writer, as far as it can see, I think that I'm making good progress, and I'm where I want to be. Okay. And part of what I wanted to talk to you guys about today was sort of my thoughts for the ending, and not that I'm going to like spoil it and give it away. I mean, it's not a linear narrative, But I just wanted to share some of the thoughts that I thought were really funny and interesting, and maybe as a part of kind of giving you a sneak peek of what I'm thinking, it can help me to also, selfishly, can help me to also kind of knead my thoughts a little bit, then we can proof it, let it rise, etc. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 different parts of the book and try to weave it together, see if it makes sense, see if there's any additional parts of inspiration. A lot of times I get inspired from when I talk aloud. I talk aloud to myself a lot, which is why it makes sense to have this podcast. Okay, so the book begins, part 1 is about diagnosis. And the kind of narrative here, right, is that oftentimes when we're in a toxic work situation, it can feel, I would say that the dominant feeling is one of isolation and loneliness. And it is inside of this isolation that we often don't know if we're crazy, if we're making it up. We often, there's the initial response, right? There's the initial injury, but then we continue to injure ourselves by feeling guilty, feeling shame, berating ourselves, feeling like this shouldn't be such a big deal, okay? So part 1, the diagnosis, is really to give you a vocabulary and to give you a kind of dictionary of, hey, here are some of the common things that happen in toxic work environments, and what can you relate to? And in doing that, what I'm trying to do is take away some of the stigma and also reassure you that you're not crazy, that you're not alone, right? So chapter 1, it's like a list of, I call them tyrants, because I really do feel that there are people out there that are emotional manipulators and who are there to try to waste your time and frustrate you. So some examples would be like the micromanager, the chaos maker, the control freak, the skeptic, right? When we move on to chapter 2, that is around symptoms. And the reason I'm kind of talking about, okay, here are some of the perpetrators, and then we're going to go into the symptoms, is because often when I'm coaching someone one-on-one, let's say I haven't met them before, I don't know anything about their situation other than maybe an email that they'd sent me. I am very curious about the symptoms that are presenting, because based on the severity, the urgency, the depth, or the broadness of the symptom, that can really help us to understand the underlying stuff that's going on, right? And so if you've ever been stressed at a job, these symptoms are going to be really familiar to you. They're going to be, here's some. There's dissociation, burnout, rumination, hypervigilance, numbness, disorientation, indecision. Now, depending on, first off, all of these are a constellation, okay? So depending on, you might have one really prominent thing. You might be like, it is just a big gray blanket of all of these symptoms, right? But what we try to do is we try to take one at a time and say, what is the one that is feeling the most, let's say, vocal right now, the one that's presenting the most, right? And then we might try to unpack that. And from that, what I really try to understand next is your story. So what is the story that you are telling yourself? Okay, chapters 3 and 4, and remember, we're still in kind of the diagnosis mode. Chapters 3 and 4 are really around patterns and wound mapping. Okay, so patterns, and this has been my thesis for a long time, but essentially I feel like often when we are wounded at work, when we don't address the underlying issues, when we don't look at like what's really happening and why am I exhibiting these behaviors that overcompensate for maybe a lack of confidence, or compensate for insecurity around money, or that I'm too enmeshed with my family and I don't not know how to tell them no, right? When we can look at, oh, okay, this is the source of the pain, then we can understand what kind of pattern that we're fitting into. Because the whole goal here, right, is to break the pattern. So if you're a people pleaser, I'm going to tell you, hey, you should try to say no to people. Learn how to say no. If you are an overachiever, that ties back to perfectionism. If you are someone who feels like, oh, I can't rely on anyone, I have to do everything myself, right? That goes back to how do you learn to be vulnerable? Okay, so that is part one. And then part two is really this sort of healing story, right? Because I think part one is like, okay, we see what's broken, we see what's wrong. And you would be surprised. You might think, wait, I'm just supposed to read this and then no. I'm pretty sure you will read this and then say to yourself, oh my God, this is me. That's what I hope. I hope there will be moments where you're like, oh no, like I want you to see yourself on the page. So part two, this sort of healing arc, right? And the way that I've structured this is I really thought about essentially the hero's journey. And I thought about in every kind of healing story, there tends to be it's a 3-part act. So the first part is what I'm going to call separation. Separation is when your life as you know it breaks. Okay, so this is where you have to take medical leave because you're so stressed out. This is where you're crying alone at home because you just feel like you're being bullied every day at work. This is where you feel stuck, you feel trapped. This is like the moment before the dam bursts. Okay? The next stage is liminal space. And so liminal space, so limen from the Greek means threshold. So liminal space is really that moment between point A and point B. You haven't made a change yet, so you're just kind of floating. Okay, and this makes people very uncomfortable because we don't know how to be in an in-between. We don't know how to sit in a void. We don't know how to navigate when there is no map, especially if we have been trained and programmed and patterned to follow someone else's map, right? And so this goes back to if you came from, say, an immigrant family, or if you had very dominant parents where individuation is not part of the culture. So they're going to just tell you, hey, you should just go to law school, right? And you don't necessarily feel that you have a choice. Okay, so more traditional cultures, it's going to be even more exacerbated. So liminal space is also about sitting in the unknown and becoming friends with your shadow. And shadow work is a part of this, which stems from Jungian Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, right? These studies around what are the parts of you that do not fit neatly into the ego ideal, right? So the ego ideal, and this is very much programmed, is probably the good girl. It's probably the part of you that shows up on time, is polite, is kind, is beloved by your community, right? So that's the ego ideal. The shadow is anything that just doesn't fit in that. The shadow is your annoyance. The shadow is your critical voice. The shadow is your impatience. The shadow is the part of you that wants to burn everything down. So we become friends with the shadow because the shadow can reveal a lot about our creative impulses. And also the thing is with the shadow doesn't lie. Shadow can't lie. Shadow has no tolerance for bullshit and also does not bullshit. Okay, so that's liminal space, sort of navigating that in between. Okay. The final part of this arc, of the healing arc, is integration, which is, okay, so you've separated from what you knew. You walked through a sort of dark night of the soul. And now you have to come back to life, but with a renewed perspective and with a renewed sense of purpose. You have somehow proven to yourself that you can be strong and that you can make it on your own without the trappings of parental approval, of being the favorite, of being the boss's right hand, all of that. Okay. And so it is about integration, but the way I interpret it is it's really about protection. Because now you know what's at stake, now you know what's important to you, and now you can say, okay, F this. I have to protect my peace, my space, my sleep, my body, my energy. The last kind of subchapter in that chapter is called Be Ruthless, because I literally am like, just stop being so nice to people. You have to put yourself first. Okay. So then we're landing the plane. Okay, so part 3 is about going home. I call it going home because I really think that's what everyone's trying to do, is find themselves, remember who they are, and then go home to that. Okay. So there's a couple chapters in here, and this is the part that I'm really kind of massaging and figuring out what the order is, but I'm going to just kind of tell you some themes. Okay. So one major theme is this idea of like, you have to bet on yourself. And I don't mean quit everything, start your own business, although you certainly can if you want to, and that can be a separate video. But I mean, you have to choose yourself. You know, you can't choose a company's well-being over your own. You have to choose yourself. And I move on to say that you want to bet on yourself, but you have to start with small bets. A lot of times people think that when they want to make a change, they just go from 0 to 100. They think, oh, I have to make this really dramatic change, and if I don't do it exactly the way that it's envisioned in my mind, then I'm a failure, right? And I say, no, start with small bets. And the example that I give is when I wanted to be a writer, okay? The first thing that I did was a big bet. And that big bet, it was silly. I have a friend from college who's like some fancy editor, and I reached out to her and was like, hey, it's been a long time. I would love to be a writer, and I have some ideas. Can I pitch them to you? And she was polite, but she also was like, oh my God, F off. I'm sure. I'm sure. She was like, F off. She was like, well, let me put you in touch with my junior editor, and you can send your ideas to her, and then blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I did that thinking, oh my God, this is my moment. Like, it's all going to work out. No, I sent her 3 kind of lukewarm ideas that were not fully formed. And I had no business pitching this to her. I didn't have a byline. I didn't have any examples. I didn't have previous articles to show her. Like, at the time I was a nobody. Okay. But I go in hot. I'm thinking I have to shoot for the stars. Okay. That's what I call a big bet. The problem with a big bet is that when you inevitably don't realize exactly what you were hoping for, you feel dejected and you feel rejected and you feel like a loser. So then you're like, well, I don't want to do that again. Jeez. What am I doing? I'm not going to do that again. Right? And so you retreat. So I didn't end up pitching to another. I just stopped trying. I was like, oh my God, it's too scary. Who wants to read it anyway? Ugh. Okay. Couple years later, because this is the nature of when you have a desire. This is the nature. It never goes away. So pay attention, right? Pay attention to these small yearnings that you have, the things that never seem to go away. I still wanted to write. This time I was like, all right, chill, Mandy, just chill. Okay. I decided, well, first off, you say you want to be a writer, but like, do you even like to write? Because you don't write. I ended up doing the most low stakes thing because I was like, okay, this time it's not going to be for some fanfare. It's going to be for me and for me to decide, is this even something that I want? So I started a WordPress blog. When I tell you I had 2 subscribers, but I didn't care. I was like, this is actually fun. I actually do enjoy writing. And that WordPress blog turned into a Substack, which I still have to this day. And so I consider the WordPress blog with 2 subscribers, I consider that to be a small bet. Meaning the way I describe it is I say it's a who cares. It's a who cares bet, right? We can't be out here trying to save the world with every time we try to get closer to what we want to do in life. Keep it small, keep it light, keep it casual, right? But keep trying. Try. But just have it be low stakes so that you don't freak yourself out. Okay? Later on, I talk about the importance of being delulu, and you guys know I've talked about that quite a bit on this podcast. So I just really go deeper into this idea that you do have to have an irrational belief in yourself if you're going to do something for yourself. And notice I don't say if you're going to succeed or if you're going to make $1 million. Like, it's really not about that. It's just about trying to do something for yourself. Okay. So one more sort of theme that I want to share with you guys, it comes from this book on shamanism by Mircea Eliade. So Eliade was a Romanian historian who taught at the University of Chicago, and he was also like this great explorer and kind of obsessed with, okay, in my mind, he was like an academic, but just based on the subject matter of what he was interested in, he was interested in cataloging religions. But this book is literally called Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. So I also think he was kind of a partier. And I think he was like very curious about how shamanism or different religions appeared in our modern day society. Okay, so he wrote shamanism, and he also wrote this book called The Sacred and the Profane. And his argument in that, and the sacred and the profane is a concept from Emil Durkheim, who was a sociologist. Okay, so he didn't make that up, but he's sort of borrowing that phrase. And the idea is that in everyday life, there are sort of 2 modes. And this is a way to think about organized religion. Okay, there are essentially 2 modes. One is the profane. So the profane is the everyday stuff. Okay, so for example, the UPS guy dropping off a package. For example, going to Target and picking up some groceries. Okay, for example, putting gas in your car. Okay, these are everyday profane things. And there's a differentiation where it's argued that there's this other state, which is the sacred. And Eliade sort of points to different religions, saying that in a lot of religions, there is a focus on creating these sacred spaces. You think about if you walk into a modern Christian church, for example, that when you walk into a church, you usually walk straight, and then the church kind of has like a left arm and a right arm, right? And if you were to look at the church from a bird's eye view, you would see that the church is typically in the shape of a cross. Okay, so similarly, if you look at a Jewish temple, the temples are typically built so that they are facing Jerusalem. Okay, so this idea that when people enter these spaces, that by entering the spaces, they are automatically kind of transported to this other realm. And I'm not religious. I mean, I did not grow up, my parents were basically agnostic. I didn't grow up going to church at all. But I could tell you, I still, when I would walk into a church, I would feel, it just feels a little different. And maybe it is because they have created this sort of ambiance, there's lights, there's smells, there's sounds, they're really engaging all of your senses. But it's this idea that perhaps if we walk into a sacred space, that we can transform linear time, right? And I mean, it gets really deep, and I'm not even sure how much I'm going to talk about in my book, because I'm like, do people even care? Like, this is like kind of getting out there. But there is this idea that the way we understand modern time is that it's linear, right? Meaning, okay, it's October now, and then next month it'll be December, and then soon it'll be 2025. It's just like one long straight line, and every year is divided into 12 months, and every month is divided into 30 or 31 days, right? And so that there's this very linear approach to time. One of the arguments is that in religious times, that time was considered circular. And that in olden times, people actually believed that when the end of the year came and the new year began, it was a literal reset. And it harkens back to this idea that in old religious times, people were trying to get as close to God as they could. And so what they would do is they would try to replicate the actions of God. So from chaos, then the cosmos was born. And so if they could, for example, at the end of the year, replicate this new year happening, just like how the universe would be created, then they could get closer to God. I don't know if I'm explaining that perfectly. Okay, so clearly I'm still trying to figure this out, and this is like a very dense text, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to like make that connection, or if I'm going to be able to explain it in a way that is accessible, but however, I will try. Okay, so that's sort of what I'm wrestling with. And for those of you who are ever interested in writing a self-help book, I'm telling you that at the end, what happens is you call in all of these guides. And for me, the guides have been just other books. And I just became obsessed with, I must have read 15 books in the past week, and some I've read before, but I've just become absolutely obsessed with reading historical texts on writing, just other books on creativity, because I feel like this is a collective conversation, and I want to make sure that I am like faithfully in a conversation and not just like spewing stuff. Like, I really want this to be a very well thought out and like researched, not in a boring way, but very well thought out piece of work that will stand the test of time. Okay. The connection that I'm trying to make, though, is just this idea. In the final chapter, I write about this kind of funny example of a time when I worked in corporate America, and I was in this like meeting, and this dude was giving me advice, and how he was like, well, in order to get ahead in corporate America, what I do is I look at the job description, and then I get one highlighter, and I highlight all the things that the skills I have. And then I get another color highlighter, and I highlight all the skills that I don't have. And this was very well-meaning advice, but when I tell you that I wanted to just die of boredom, I was like, my life cannot be deduced to having different colored highlighters and reviewing job descriptions. Like, I just refuse to do it. And so it's that example of how we feel dead at work, contrasted with a time when I actually felt alive in my work. And I tell a story of when I was coaching someone for one of the first times that I was really coaching someone, and I was helping her with this interview to get into B school. And I remember really just like closing my eyes and getting so into it. And I was in my basement, and I was just like talking to her, but it was almost like I was channeling something else, because I was just trying to get her in touch with like her inner purpose and her sense of meaning, and how that could translate. I mean, it's like very silly now in hindsight to be like, how does business school act as the bridge to, it's like, ugh. But we were really diving into her background and her deep desires and like what was driving her to do this. And I kept digging until we hit gold, and then we found the narrative. And what I wrote about is just this idea that like, that was a moment when I felt alive, because I felt connected to And I don't know what word I'm going to use, but it's like I felt connected to my creativity, to my sense of something bigger than me. It was just electricity. Like I felt electricity in my body. And how in the past 8 years as a coach, like that's why I kept going, was I'm just chasing that feeling. When I'm sort of on, and people might say, oh, that's a flow state, that's just when you lose sense of time and space, and that's like a productivity hack. And I think it's more than that. I think it's more than just like a flow state in the commercial capitalist sense. I think that there is actually a connection with something sacred. I think that your creativity can connect you to something sacred. And so, and I don't mean this in a religious sense. Again, I'm not religious, but just this idea that, the contrast between feeling dead and alive at work, and then the contrast of the sacred and the profane, and how can we build this connection to something that sparks us, something that gives us electricity, and that it is possible to find that in your work. I know, because I have found it, and it's very fleeting, just like the creative muse is fleeting. But these are this is what I am. This is the subject matter that I'm working with. I am hopeful that in the next week or so, it's all going to fall into place, and it will be a beautiful, coherent message. And for now, it is what it is. And I think part of being creative is accepting that you can only see 5 feet ahead of you, and I haven't seen the full picture yet, but also being willing and open to share where you're at, even if it's not perfect. Like, I am fully cognizant of the fact that this podcast episode may be extremely rambling and incoherent and not as polished. There aren't bullet points to this thing. And being actually very okay with that as part of my process, and just accepting that and embracing that and being like, yeah, okay. It's not fully baked, but you want to peek inside the oven? It's getting there. 20 more minutes and those muffins are going to be popping. So that is where I'm at. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. I hope this was enjoyable. I hope it sparked something. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If there are any experts on, the sacred and the profane, or any experts on your own creative process, I'd love to hear, because I, again, think that it's part of this larger conversation. Okay, I love you guys. Thank you for listening and watching, and I will see you next week. Okay, bye.